Hi there, this is your narrator, Ali, and I hope you're ready to relax and hear the story of Keo, a young, laughing hippopotamus who is trapped by a clever villager, Gouie, and freed only after swearing to return as a captive. In the deep heart of Africa, where the Congo River coils like a great green serpent through jungles and marshes, there are places the modern world has never quite tamed. In one such bend of the river, where the water slows and widens, and the mud is as soft as sleep, there dwelt, so the old stories say, a royal family of hippopotamuses whose line was older than kings, older than cities, older even than the memory of men. From bank to bank they knew that river as a mother knows the features of her child. Every hollow where the water deepened to cool shade, every sandbar that glimmered gold in the sun, every rock and fallen tree along the shore. To them, the Congo was not a mere ribbon of water, but a living companion whose moods they understood. Within this ancient tribe, in a season not so long ago as the stars reckon time, there was born a young hippopotamus whose laughter would shake the jungle and change the fate of more than one creature. This is the story of Keo, the laughing hippopotamus. Chapter 1. A Royal Birth on the Congo. The night Keo came into the world, the river lay wide and calm under a sky full of slow-moving clouds. Frogs sang from the reeds, fireflies stitched glittering patterns among the grasses, and the moon poured its pale light over the broad backs of the hippopotamuses half submerged along the bank. At the very center of the herd, in a sheltered shallows, where the water cupped the land tenderly, lay the queen. She was a huge creature, scarred by years and battles, her tusks long and curved like scythes of ivory. Around her, the elders of the tribe lingered, grunting softly, keeping watch against crocodiles and the scent of hunters. When the first thin cry, more like a snort than a wail, rose from the queen's side, a ripple of attention ran through the herd. Heads lifted, ears twitched. The newborn calf, slick and small by hippopotamus measure, struggled to find his footing in the mud. He was, it must be admitted, particularly fat, even for a baby hippo. His sides bulged pleasantly, his legs were sturdy little pillars, his round eyes, still half closed, shone like polished beads. As he shook himself free of the last clinging water, a sound burst from him. Not a cry of distress, but a bubbling, cheerful grunt that rolled into something very like laughter. The queen regarded her child with deep satisfaction. "I shall call him Keo," she announced in the language of the hippopotamuses. To her ears the name sounded soft and affectionate, carrying the sense of plump contentment. What she did not remember, or perhaps chose to ignore, was that among hippos the word Keo properly meant fat and lazy, rather than fat and round. None of the tribe dared to correct her. The queen's tusks, sharp and gleaming, were argument enough. So the calf was Keo, and Keo he remained. As he grew, he proved himself every bit as charming as his mother believed. The mud of the riverbank became his playground. He wallowed with such delight that sprays of brown water sparkled in the air like fountains. He learned to waddle inland, to nibble at wild cabbages and tender grasses, chewing with an expression of perfect bliss. The sun shone warmly on his thick hide. The river wrapped him nightly in its cool embrace. What set Keo apart from the other calves, however, was not his size nor his appetite, but his humor. His little red eyes were forever glimmering with mischief. At the smallest excuse, or at no excuse at all, he would burst into a rolling, musical series of grunts and snorts that sounded remarkably like hearty laughter. Gook, ook, 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 gook, ook, 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 it went, starting deep in his broad chest and rippling out until even the staid elders found their bellies jiggling in response. He laughed when a bird startled from a branch. He laughed when his own foot slipped in the mud. He laughed when the sun came up, and again when it went down. The older hippos, whose tempers leaned more toward solemnity, shook their massive heads fondly. "He is the jolliest of us all," they said. "Our Keo is a blessing to a weary world." From the villages scattered along the river's edge, the black people heard this strange, gleeful sound echoing through the night fog. They could not approach too closely, for they knew the fierce temper of the royal herd. But their ears told them that among the great beasts there was one whose voice rose again and again in laughter. In their own tongue, they nicknamed him Ippi, the Merry One, though they spoke the name softly, for no human who valued his life willingly ventured near him. For between the river people and the hippopotamuses there lay an old hostility, hard and unforgiving as sun-baked clay. Chapter 2. Enemies on the Riverbank. The black villagers along the Congo had long understood that the meat of a hippopotamus was rich and plentiful. A single animal, once killed and carved, could feed many families. The hides served to make tough shields. The tusks, carved carefully, became ornaments or tools. Moreover, some of the more daring men had discovered that a living hippopotamus, once captured and bound, could be ridden like a beast of burden through the jungle. Perched upon its broad back, they could cross swampy places that would mire an ordinary horse. To do so was dangerous, but the pride of such a feat was great. The hippopotamuses, for their part, feared neither spear nor rope, except when taken by surprise. They knew well the oily scent of human skin and did not confuse it with the familiar musk of other beasts. When that smell drifted toward them on the river wind, they stiffened, lifted their heads, and prepared for battle. More than once, when hunters crept too near or a fisherman poled his canoe unwisely close to the herd, the hippos would surge from the water in a mass of gray flesh and flashing tusks. Their jaws could snap a man in two. Their feet, heavy as stone, could crush him into the mud. The struggle between the two races had gone on so long that no one now remembered who had first wronged whom. It was simply the way of things. When hippo met man at close quarters, blood would likely be spilled. In one of the small villages nestled among the trees, there lived a young man named Gouie. His hut was a modest thing, stitched together from branches smeared with mud. His clothing was little more than a mat of woven grass tied around his middle. Yet, despite his simple lot, Gouie held a certain standing among his people. His uncle was the village chief, a man of wide shoulders and loud voice. His grandfather was the village sorcerer, an old, wiry fellow known as the Boneless Wonder because he could twist his body into knots and coils that would have broken the limbs of ordinary men. Whether he truly lacked bones or merely joints of unusual flexibility, no one quite knew, but his contortions, along with his muttered spells, had earned him deep respect. From this heritage, Gouie inherited a mixture of ambition and unusual knowledge. He spent much time alone, squatting on a rock or beneath a tree, staring toward the river with narrowed eyes. While others laughed or drowsed, he pondered, and often, perhaps inevitably, his thoughts turned to the hippopotamuses. How might one capture such a beast? He would ask himself. How might one bend its strength to human use? The horn of a gazelle is fine, the hide of an antelope is useful, but a hippopotamus, that is a prize to make a man famous. One day, as the sun slid westward and shadows lengthened, an idea came to him. It grew slowly at first, like a seed taking root, then spread through his mind until he could not keep from smiling. He would not tell even his grandfather of this plan. It would be his alone. He chose a place along the riverbank where the water curved sharply first one way, then the other, forming a narrow neck of land between two bends. Here, the hippopotamuses often passed, trudging from one favorite wallow to the next. With a sharpened stick and his bare hands, Gouie began to dig. Day after day he worked, gouging a great pit into the earth midway between the two curves. The hole grew wider and deeper until a full-grown hippopotamus might stand within it and not see over the rim. When at last he deemed the pit sufficient, he cut small branches from nearby trees and laid them across the opening. Over these he scattered earth, smoothing it with care until the ground looked undisturbed. A few leaves, strewn casually, completed the illusion. To any unsuspecting eye, the place appeared as solid as the surrounding turf. Standing back to admire his work, Gouie chuckled under his breath. Now let one of those fat river horses wander this way, he thought. We shall see who has the advantage then. He went home to his evening meal, satisfied and secretive. Chapter 3. Keo's Fall and a Bargain in the Pit. That same evening, when the light had softened to gold and the river glowed like a strip of molten metal, Queen Hippopotamus turned toward her son. Keo, now grown beyond calfhood into a sturdy young hippo, lolled in the shallows, his round sides bobbing gently with the movement of the water. "Keo," she said, in a tone of maternal authority, "run across the bend and ask your Uncle Nicky to come. I have found a strange plant by the bank and would know whether it is safe to eat." Keo, who seldom received errands of importance, puffed with pride. He heaved his bulk from the mud, droplets cascading from his hide, and grinned broadly. The thought of being entrusted with a message made him feel, for the first time, like a hippo of consequence. "Gook, ook, ook, ook," he laughed, the sound rolling up the river. He set off through the bushes, his feet squelching pleasantly in the soft earth. The evening air smelled of damp leaves and distant cooking fires from the human village. Keo, however, was too delighted with his own importance to pay attention to such things. His mind composed little speeches he might make when he found Uncle Nicky. His laughter bubbled up again and again, scattering birds from branches as he went. Perhaps it was this very merriment that led to his misstep. In the middle of a particularly hearty "ook, ook, ook, ook," the earth beneath him vanished. There was a cracking of branches, a rush of loose soil, and Keo plunged downward into darkness. He landed with a thump at the bottom of Gouie's pit. For a moment, the breath was knocked from him. His nose smarted painfully where it had struck a buried stone. When he blinked grit from his eyes and looked up, he saw only a round circle of sky high above, fringed by leaves. He tried to climb, but his broad feet found no purchase on the steep, smooth walls. Again and again he slid back, landing in the same heap at the bottom. At last he stopped and considered his situation. A curious position, he thought, and despite the ache in his nose, a chuckle escaped him. Trust me to fall into a hole on my first important errand. Gook, uk, oh. The laugh, though weaker than usual, calmed him. Hippopotamuses are not easily unnerved. He decided that the best course for the moment was to sleep. Curling his bulk as comfortably as he could, he closed his eyes. Before long, his snores drifted up to the surface, where the stars listened with mild interest. At dawn, Gouie crept to the pit's edge to inspect his trap. When he peered over, expecting perhaps to see a huge adult hippo, he started back in surprise. Down below, blinking up at him with bleary eyes, lay Kao. "Ah," Gouie exclaimed softly, "it is Ippi, the jolly one." Kao sniffed and recognized at once the scent of a human. He sprang up as far as he could, opening his mouth wide in the hope of seizing a leg. But Gouie had excellent reflexes. He jumped back from the edge and, when he felt safe, called down in the hippopotamus tongue, a language he had picked up in scraps from his sorcerer grandfather. "Be still, little one. You are my prisoner. If I could reach you, I would take a piece of your leg as toll," Kao retorted. The notion amused him, and he snorted a short "cook-ook-ook" at his own wit. Gouie, however, felt no inclination to jest. He saw that his captive was young and not yet furnished with grand tusks. This disappointed him somewhat, for tusks held great value. Nevertheless, a captured hippo was not to be sneered at. He withdrew without further conversation, leaving Kao to spend another day and night in the pit. Hunger gnawed at the young hippo, but his nature was such that even misery did not quite smother his sense of the ridiculous. He imagined his relatives searching for him along the riverbank, their great heads swinging in puzzlement, and let out a faint chuckle. By the time Gouie returned on the second morning, Kao was weak and his laughter little more than a breath. "Do you yield?" Gouie called down. "Or will you still try to fight?" "What will become of me if I yield?" Kao asked, his voice rough with thirst. Gouie scratched his head. "You are too young yet for hard work," he mused aloud. "If I kill you for meat, I shall gain little, for your tusks are not grown. I had hoped for your mother, or one of your uncles. Why, O merry one, did you fall into my trap? You are of small use to me." Kao, despite his situation, could not help emitting a hoarse "cook-ook-ook." "You must let me go then," he said, "for I profit you nothing." "I will not release you for nothing," Gouie answered. "Yet perhaps we can strike a bargain." "What sort of bargain?" "I will set you free," the black man said slowly, "if you will swear by the tusks of your grandfather that you will return to me in a year and a day and surrender yourself again as my prisoner." Kao hesitated. Among the hippopotamuses, to swear by the tusks of one's ancestor was no light thing. It was a promise bound with honor and memory. Yet his stomach cramped with emptiness, and a year and a day sounded very far away. Plenty of things might happen before then, he thought. Perhaps the river would change its course, or Gouie would forget. "Very well," he said at last with a weary laugh. "If you free me now, I swear by my grandfather's tusks to come back to you in a year and a day and be your captive." Gouie's eyes gleamed. He understood that a young hippo allowed to grow would become a treasure beyond measure. Without delay, he began to dig away one side of the pit, pushing earth down to form an incline. Slowly, laboriously, he fashioned a sloping ramp. Kao, when it was finally completed, dragged himself upward, step by heavy step, until he reached the surface. The feel of open air and level ground under his feet filled him with such joy that his laughter rang out in full strength. "Cook, cook, 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 cook," he cried to the morning. "Farewell, Gouie," he called. "In a year and a day you shall see me again." With that, he waddled off toward the river, eager to find his mother and plunge into the cool, forgiving mud. Gouie watched him go, already planning how he would use so splendid a beast when the time came. Chapter 4. Sorrow on the River and a Quest for Help. Keo's return caused a rush of relief along the riverbank. When his mother saw him trotting toward the water, she surged forward, scattering smaller hippos in her path. "My child!" she cried, puffing with emotion. The others thronged around, pressing close, their little eyes wide with curiosity. Keo, being himself, recounted his adventure with a blend of pride and humor. He described the fall, the hunger, the bargain. When he mentioned the promise to return in a year and a day, his mother's eyes widened in horror. "You swore by the tusks of your grandfather?" Uncle Nicky demanded, his voice grave. "I did," Keo admitted, though he managed a sheepish grin. "It seemed the simplest way to get breakfast." The effect of his words was dramatic. A groan rolled through the tribe. Some hippos snorted in dismay, others squeezed their eyes shut, for a promise made by such an oath could not be lightly broken. To do so would stain not only Keo's honor, but that of his ancestors. The queen burst into noisy weeping. Her tears, large and copious, splashed into the river. The others, moved by her grief and by their own affection for the jolly youngster, joined in. So many hippos weeping at once is no small thing. The river itself swelled a little with the addition. Keo, in contrast, emitted a small chuckle. "Why such fuss?" he asked. "A year and a day is a long way off. Something will surely happen." "It is our duty to try to save you," Uncle Nicky said solemnly, ignoring the attempt at humor. "But we must respect the oath. You must go when the time comes. Meanwhile, we shall think." Think they did. Meetings were held where hippos of all ranks gathered, noses almost touching as they grunted suggestions. Some proposed rushing the village and stamping every human flat. Others advocated finding a way to frighten Gouie into fleeing. But each plan had flaws. Months slipped by. Keo grew, his body lengthening and broadening until he measured nearly 15 feet from snout to tail and stood 6 feet high at the shoulder. His tusks sprouted ivory and hardened to a keen edge, yet his laughter remained as bubbling and hearty as ever. Every now and then, drifting across the jungle, Gouie would hear that familiar gook ook ook ook. He would smile to himself in his hut, fingering the charms his grandfather had given him. A year and a day passes quickly, he would think. When it ends, I shall have a servant mightier than any ox. As the promised time dwindled to a mere week, the queen's anxiety grew unbearable. She wallowed less, grazed less, and started at every sound. At last she called for another council. "If we do nothing," she declared, "my child will go to his doom. I cannot endure it." Many foolish ideas were put forward and dismissed. Then Uncle Nep, an immense and thoughtful hippo whose wisdom was much respected, cleared his throat. "There is one," he said, "to whom we have never yet appealed, the mighty Glinkomok." At the name, a hush fell. Even Keo paused his amused snorting. Glinkomok, in the legends of the beasts, was an ancient being older than the river itself. Part animal, part man, part bird, part fish, it dwelt in a cavern far upstream beneath a wall of rock that caught the last light of evening. It had, over countless ages, gathered knowledge from every corner of earth and water, becoming part sorcerer, part wizard, part something more. Few had seen it and returned with their wits whole. To trouble Glinkomok is no small thing, Uncle Nicky muttered. Yet we have always honored it from afar, Uncle Nep replied. Perhaps for the sake of our queen's son, it will hear us. The queen lifted her head. I will go myself, she said fiercely. If Glinkomok chooses to destroy me, so be it. I cannot sit idle and watch my child walk into chains. I will accompany you, Uncle Nep said. I fear no creature we have faithfully respected. The others were quick to voice approval, glad it was not they who must face the mysterious being. Thus it was decided. Chapter 5. Glinkomok's Gift. The next morning, as a faint mist curled over the river, the Queen and Uncle Nep set out, with Kao swimming between them. Their massive bodies moved with surprising grace, gliding upstream against the current. All that day they swam, pausing only to rest in deep pools. Birds called from the trees. Crocodiles watched warily from the banks, recognizing that this was no ordinary procession. On the second day, as the sun sank toward the horizon, they came upon a high cliff of dark rock. At its base yawned a broad cave, its mouth like a black wound in the stone. The water there deepened and cooled. This is the place, Uncle Nep murmured. The three hippos halted, front feet planted on the muddy shelf, while their bodies still floated in the river. Together they lifted their muzzles and called out a respectful greeting in the old tongue reserved for addressing beings greater than themselves. Silence answered at first. Then, with a movement so silent it seemed the very shadows had congealed, a form slid from the darkness. Even the brave Uncle Nep dropped his gaze. The Queen's heart hammered. Kao, in spite of his usual good humor, felt a trickle of something like fear down his spine. They saw only glimpses, a flash of scales, a feathered curve, the impression of limbs that were not quite arms and not quite fins, a glimmer of eyes that seemed to hold within them reflections of stars long vanished. The creature radiated age and power like heat. "Speak!" came a voice that was neither growl nor hiss, but something in between, a sound like wind rushing through a deep chasm. Uncle Nep, swallowing, began. He told the story of Kao's fall, of the hunger and the bargain, of the oath sworn on the grandfather's tusks. He spoke of the tribe's love for the jolly young hippo and the Queen's despair. When he finished, there was a pause in which even the river seemed to hold its breath. A promise sworn upon the tusks of an ancestor cannot be broken, Glinkomok said at last. The young one must go to the man as agreed. The Queen uttered a moan, burying her face briefly in the water. Yet, the creature continued, he need not go unprotected. Since you have honored me and begged for mercy, I shall grant the calf gifts to defend himself. Kao, startled, let out a small gook. Lift your right paw, Glinkomok commanded quietly. Kao obeyed, though the limb trembled slightly. The creature leaned forward, and a long, hairy tongue emerged, touching the young hippo's foot. A flash of heat went through him from toes to tusks. Then Glinkomok raised 4 thin, many-jointed hands over Kao's bowed head and began to chant in a language none of them had heard before. The sound was at once frightening and strangely beautiful, like a song hummed at the edge of a dream. As the chant faded, the voice returned to the speech of beasts. Hear now, Kao of the river, it said, your skin shall be as armor. No knife or spear wielded by man shall pierce it. Your strength shall surpass that of 10 elephants. Your step shall be swift as the river wind. Your wit shall be keen as the thorn that pierces hoof and hide. Let fear depart from you, for among your kind you will be the mightiest." Keo felt a surge of vigor. His muscles tightened with new energy. His skin tingled as though thickened. His thoughts, usually light and unworried, sharpened. Glinkomok leaned closer until its breath, hot as forge fire, brushed his ear. In a whisper only he could hear, it imparted further instructions, a plan perhaps, or a warning. Keo listened carefully, his little eyes unusually solemn. Then, without another word, the creature slid back into its cave. Darkness swallowed it. The 3 hippopotamuses bobbed where they were, shaken. Then the queen lifted her head, a broad smile breaking through the lines of worry. "We thank you," she called to the cave, though no answer came. They turned and began the journey home. As they swam, Uncle Nep shuddered once, recalling the strange forms he had seen, then settled into silence. The queen kept close to her son, occasionally bumping him with her muzzle in affectionate reassurance. Keo, on the other hand, felt almost giddy. The new strength in his limbs begged to be tested. He darted around his elders, diving under them, racing ahead, only to circle back, laughter ringing out brighter than ever. The river seemed to leap with him. When at last they reached their familiar stretch of bank, the tribe gathered eagerly to hear what had transpired. Upon learning that Keo must still keep his promise, they snorted in disappointment. But when they heard of the gifts Glinkomok had bestowed, armor, hard skin, immense strength, quickness, and sharp wit, their mood lifted. "If the Mighty One has prepared him," they said, "then we need not fear for his fate." On the morning when the year and a day came full circle, they lined the bank to bid him farewell. Keo accepted their nuzzles and affectionate nudges with good cheer. "Do not look so mournful," he chided gently. "This may yet be the best adventure of all. Gook, 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 gook." His laughter followed him as he trotted into the jungle toward the village. Chapter 6. The jolly beast of burden Gouie had watched the calendar of moons and seasons with great care. On the appointed day, he rose early, heart beating with a mixture of excitement and unease. Part of him wondered if the hippopotamus would truly return. Among his own people, promises made under duress were not always honored. Yet, as the sun cleared the treetops, he heard, faint but unmistakable, a familiar laugh approaching through the underbrush. Gook, ook, ook, ook. When Keo emerged from the trees, Gouie's eyes widened. The young hippo was now enormous, his barrel-shaped body glistening, his tusks gleaming like polished ivory. Power radiated from him like heat from sun-baked stone. "Ah," Gouie breathed, "what a bargain I made." In his mind he already tasted the meat and pictured the wealth of tusk and hide. "I shall feast as never before," he thought. Cautiously he approached, knife in hand. Keo stood calmly, regarding him with an almost amused gaze. Without ceremony, Gouie drove the blade forward, intending to pierce the thick hide behind the hippo's shoulder. To his astonishment, the knife glanced off as though striking stone. Its edge dulled. The handle jolted his hand painfully. Frowning, he tried again in another spot, then another. Each thrust failed. It was as if Keo were encased in armor. Sweat broke out on the black man's brow. He tried a spear, then an axe, each with the same result. Not even a scratch marred the animal's skin. Keo, watching these efforts, could not contain his mirth. His laughter rolled out in great gusts that shook his sides. The jungle seemed to echo with gook, 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 gook. At last, Gouie threw down his weapons in frustration. "Very well," he muttered. "I cannot eat you, but I can still make use of you." He clambered up onto Keo's broad back, gripping a fold of skin for balance. "Move, river horse," he commanded. Keo trotted forward with surprising speed, carrying the man as easily as a leaf. Through the village they went, drawing gasps of amazement. Children pointed, women laughed in disbelief, men crowded around, their eyes shining with desire. Soon, other villagers begged for rides. Gouie, seeing opportunity, began to bargain. Bracelets of copper, strings of shells, small ornaments of hammered gold. All these he demanded in exchange for a turn upon the jolly hippopotamus. By midday, he had amassed a small pile of treasures. A dozen men clambered onto Keo's back, settling themselves in a precarious row. The one nearest Keo's ears smacked his broad neck and cried, "Run, mud dog, run!" Keo's eyes gleamed. The whispered instructions of Glinkomok stirred in his memory. He ran, not with the lumbering gait the villagers expected, but with a speed that stole their breath. Through the village gate he thundered across the packed earth into the jungle. Branches whipped past, leaves brushed their faces. The men shrieked, clinging desperately to each other. Keo's laughter boomed louder than their cries. "Cook-ook, ook, ook, ook." He made straight for the river, not at the familiar bend by his own herd, but upstream toward the cliff where Glinkomok's cave yawned. The mouth of that dark opening appeared ahead, black against the lighter rock. Without slowing, Keo plunged into the river, the weight of the men adding to his momentum. Cold water closed over their heads. At the bottom, where the light barely reached, Keo twisted, letting his riders be swept away by the current. Their bodies flailed. Bubbles streamed upward. Above, in the shadowed cave, Glinkomok felt the tremor of disturbed water and knew what was needed. By the time Keo surfaced and blew a fountain of water from his nostrils, there was not a single black man to be seen. They had vanished, taken where they could trouble hippopotamuses no more. Keo turned and swam calmly back toward the village, humming little grunts of satisfaction. When he emerged alone, Gouie, who had been waiting to collect more ornaments from his returning patrons, stared in confusion. "Where are my brothers?" he demanded. Keo blinked innocently. "I carried them far away," he said. "They remained where I left them." Gouie's mouth opened, but before he could press for details, another group of men clamored for their turn, waving trinkets. His greed smothered his curiosity. Once more, he piled riders onto Keo's back and urged him on. Again, the hippopotamus ran. Again, he plunged into the river by Glinkomok's cave, and again, he returned alone. As the day wore on, Gouie began to notice that his village was growing quiet. The usual shouts and laughter were absent. Those who had gone for rides had not come back. A prickle of unease crept over him. At last, when no other men remained to trade for rides, he decided he must see for himself what was happening. He mounted Keo. "Run, river hog, run!" he ordered. Keo needed no second bidding. Chapter 7. A Reversed Bargain. This time, instead of heading upstream, Keo turned toward the stretch of river where his own tribe basked. His feet beat a steady rhythm on the earth. His laughter pealed. Gouie clung to his back, every jolt sending a throb through his bones. They burst from the jungle at the familiar bend. The great forms of the hippopotamuses lined the banks and shallows, watching with small, intent eyes. Keo trotted straight into the river until it rose above Gouie's waist. Then, with a powerful flex of his legs, he dived, rolling his body so that the black man was swept free. Gouie surfaced spluttering, arms flailing. The current carried him toward midstream. To his right loomed Uncle Nep and a cluster of large hippos, their heavy bodies blocking the way to that bank. Their eyes gleamed with a promise of trampling. To his left, the Queen and Uncle Nicky waited, their tusks shining white and lethal above their broad mouths. Panic seized Gouie. He tried to swim toward a narrow gap, but every direction seemed barred by massive forms. The river, which had always been a friend to his people, now felt like a trap. "Keo!" he cried, spotting the young hippo floating nearby, apparently unconcerned. "Keo, help me! Save me from your kin!" Keo tilted his head. "Why should I save you?" he asked, his voice mild. "You trapped me, wished to eat me, and sought to enslave me. If you save me, I will free you from all promises of slavery." Gouie gasped desperately. His arms tired, the river tugged at his legs. Keo considered. "That is not enough," he said. "I desire more." "I will serve you all my life," the man shouted, coughing as a wave splashed over his mouth. "I will obey you in everything." The hippopotamuses along the bank snorted with interest. This was a new turn indeed. "Will you," Keo asked slowly, "swear to return to me in a year and a day and become my captive, if I let you live now?" Gouie, who at that moment valued air above freedom, cried, "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." "Swear it by the bones of your grandfather," Keo said, remembering that men lacked tusks. In frightened haste, Gouie swore, invoking his ancestors' bones and all the spirits of the river besides. Satisfied, Keo swam close enough to allow the man to climb onto his back once more. Together they reached the bank where the Queen and tribe waited. Keo recounted the bargain he had just struck. There was much grunting of approval. "Since he has promised in our manner," the Queen said, "we will honor the oath. Let him go." Gouie, pale and shaken, scrambled ashore. He cast one last uncertain look at the broad backs and powerful jaws surrounding him, then fled into the jungle. Keo rolled in the shallows, laughing so hard his sides heaved. "Now we shall see," he chuckled, "whether men keep their promises better than hippos." Chapter 8. A chief. Without rest days passed, then weeks. Keo resumed his happy life along the river. Sometimes, when the moon rose and the night was very still, he would think of the bargain with Gouie and release a laugh that was half challenge, half amusement. The year turned. When the time of a year and a day drew near, Keo began to watch the paths leading to the river. He imagined the black man returning, humble and fearful, perhaps bearing gifts. "Gook, ook, ook," he would chuckle. "What a sight that will be!" But Gouie did not appear. The reason lay far away. After escaping the river, Gouie had not returned to his village. Indeed, when he arrived there, he found it nearly empty. The few remaining women and children greeted him with tears and questions. Where were their men? Gouie, unwilling to explain, gathered his bracelets, shell necklaces, and little gold ornaments, the payment he had received for the rides, and made a bundle. In the gray light before dawn, he slipped away, traveling far along paths no hippo ever walked, into another land where no one knew his history. There, with the wealth he had acquired, he set himself up as a man of consequence. The people of that place, impressed by his trinkets and his confident manner, took him for a great wanderer of mysterious power. They built him a larger hut. They bowed when he passed. By day, he strutted along the paths, issuing orders, enjoying the deference. He told tales of how he had overcome mighty beasts, hinting at adventures far grander than any he had actually known. Children trailed after him, women whispered, men nodded respectfully, but at night, when the fires died down and the village lay in shadow, sleep would not easily come. Gouie would lie upon his mat, staring up at the roof, listening to the sounds of insects and distant night birds. In the darkness, another sound would rise, not from the world around him, but from memory, the deep rolling laughter of Kao echoing over water. Gook, ook, ook, ook. He remembered the feel of the river closing over his head, the gleam of tusks on either bank, the sensation of helplessness as he had begged for his life. He heard his own voice swearing over and over by the bones of his grandfather. His people believed strongly in the power of oaths. An ancestor's bones were sacred. To break such a vow, they taught, was to invite misfortune in ways one could not predict. Yet Gouie had broken it. He had not gone back in a year and a day to offer himself as Kao's captive. He had fled instead, seeking safety in distance and in the praise of strangers. His new followers saw only a proud chief. They did not see the way his hands sometimes trembled when the river wind blew from the east. They did not hear the small, strangled cries he made in his sleep. For in truth, though he had chosen comfort over honor, his conscience gnawed at him like a rat at the edges of a mat. He could not forget that his grandfather, not the man himself, but the idea of him, the story told by elders, had no bones. The old sorcerer's body had been so twisted, so contorted in life, that when he died, there had been nothing firm enough to bury. His bones, people said, had melted into the earth. Gouie had sworn by something that did not exist. This thought bothered him more than he cared to admit. What weight had such an oath? Had he deceived Kao again, not only with his intention, but with the very substance of his promise? The more he tried to push these questions aside, the louder Kao's remembered laughter echoed in his mind. Back on the Congo, the laughing hippopotamus eventually ceased to expect his return. The year and a day passed. Another year began. The tribe, seeing no sign of the black man, shrugged their heavy shoulders. Men do not keep promises as we do, Uncle Nep observed. Kao rolled in the mud, chuckling. Perhaps, he said, yet I do not envy him his sleep. He lifted his head and let out a full, rich cook, 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 cook that rolled far over the dark water. Somewhere in a distant village, a restless chief turned on his mat and pressed his hands over his ears, though he could not have said why. Closing reflection, laughter, promises, and the weight of bones. So ends the tale of Kao, the laughing hippopotamus, and of Gouie, the man whose cleverness bound him with a promise he did not truly understand. The river still flows, bending where it has always bent, its banks perhaps bearing the wide impressions of hippo feet, its surface at times disturbed by ripples of laughter that might, if one listens closely, sound like gook ook ook ook. Kao's story carries more than amusement. It shows how joy and courage can live together in the same heart. He laughed even when the pit closed over him, even when a year and a day stretched ahead like a road to slavery. Yet his mirth was not foolishness. With the help of wisdom older than the river, he used his gift to turn captivity into victory, cruelty into comical justice. Gouie's path tells another truth. He sought advantage through trickery, counting on a distant future to loosen the binding of his words. When the time came to pay, he chose escape over honor. Outwardly, he prospered. Inwardly, he carried a gnawing unrest that no bracelets or gold could quiet. An oath once given, even one sworn by bones that never were, has a way of echoing in the soul. Between them, the laughing hippo and the sleepless man remind us that power without conscience becomes a trap, and that promises, however lightly spoken, root themselves in the deep places of memory. Laughter can lighten the heaviest journey, but it does not erase responsibility. Still, when used well, it can turn fear to courage and turn the tide against those who would use strength without kindness. And if, somewhere along a river's bend, you hear a sound like bubbling mirth rolling across the water, perhaps you will think of Kao, who kept his oath, and of Gouie, who tried to outrun his. Then you may ask yourself gently and honestly, what promises in your own life still wait, like voices beneath the river, to be remembered? For more stories that can help you relax, don't forget to like and subscribe.